What can be done by the government and the non-government sectors to see to it that the potential for collaboration between the continent and the subcontinent can be exploited fully. I would have been happier had there been a greater presence from the current government functionaries, but I can look at it more positively. Possibly we can speak a little more freely, and a more sanitized version of that could be passed on, so that policy making could be guided by who else but the veritable Vivekananda Foundation, whose voice counts. When we talk of Indo-African collaboration, the sector that comes foremost to my mind is infrastructure and energy. What is built lasts a lifetime and more. In a few minutes now, I'll show you a few photographs of what Indian companies, mine included, have built in Africa, which have attracted the attention of no less than the then President Barack Obama, on Kofi Annan and people like that. People ask, an Indian company built this? Now, this is the kind of awe-inspired remark that you would like to hear from people abroad, so that more work, more gates are open for Indian companies abroad in Africa, to the benefit of both. Infrastructure, I keep repeating ad nauseum, is the sine qua non for development. More so for a continent like Africa, which is rich in minerals, natural wealth, is short of abilities to process it and transport it. Railways, ports, roads, logistics anywhere is the thing where attention ought to be bestowed. It is being done now by India. If you compare our Indian company's quality to that of our northern neighbor as being executed in Africa or in neighborly regions, I can challenge and say that our quality is far superior. Definitely. Plus, we give something more. And what is that? Mr. Astana spoke about skill building and capacity building. Indian companies, when they undertake work in Africa, have been in a position to impart skills, which is supplementing what the government of India is doing by way of ITech and other scholarships, etc. In situ, when we built the presidential office of Ghana, there was an impromptu interview done by a completely impartial person, and the workers there and the supervisors in unison said, we have worked in different companies, Indian, African, European, Chinese. But what we have gained by working for this Indian company has enriched our biodata, because we had learned something. They have proudly passed on the know-how. That Indian companies do with gusto and gay abandon. And that is something, friends, Africa ought to take into account when giving contracts, not just under the lines of credit and buyer's credit, but under their own funding and under the funding of African Development Bank, etc. Which prompts me to think, maybe other countries make lines of credit conditional, saying that you give me minerals or something like that. Why not nudge African companies with their own enlightened self-interest being there, that we give you this line of credit, why don't you give more work under your own funding and African Development Bank's funding, etc., to more Indian companies. Maybe conditional or maybe just a kind of guidance or whatever it is. This would be one way of ensuring that Indian companies take up greater work to the benefit of both India and Africa. One thing is demonstrable that the work done by Indian companies in Africa are cost benefit wise far superior, quality wise much better. I'm repeating it, but I'm saying it so that no people should understand that this is a fact. It's not just that I'm saying it for the sake of saying. So this would be something which can ensure that greater collaboration between India and Africa is there. Today, the Continental Free Trade Agreement has been endorsed by a lot of countries in Africa, and therefore, more projects will come up for regional connectivity, connecting ports to pit. Let India, be it on the bias credit or under the lines of credit, or I'd suggest even the strategic funding, because this is strategic to Indian interests in several ways. Take up more such projects, mega projects, ensure that they are executed by reputed Indian companies. Smaller lines of credit can be still kept open for smaller companies, trading companies, etc., where you need not be so rigid as you are going to be in the lines of credit of higher ones, 10 million or whatever it is. But wherever it comes to huge projects, please ensure that reputed companies take them up. They are executed well, and that opens up for greater collaboration between Indian companies and Africa in different sectors. When the construction work is taken up, when an infrastructure work is taken up, not just the construction that company that gets the work. It is a steel supplier. It is the supplier of, let's say, paints or whatever it is, or building accessories. All these industries get a lot of fillip from India, and that is what ought to be encouraged. Projects like Abidjan Lagos corridor, these are all coming up now, and some more in Ghana. They're all coming up now. These are projects that ought to be looked at with greater interest by India. Again, I'll repeat it, under which, irrespective of the funding mode. India has been one of Africa's oldest trade partners. As Mr. Asthana rightly stated, we have been looking at it from a south-south perspective. That is, we do not have unlimited resources, but we are willing to share what exactly we have with Africa. Fine. But we ought to, the spirit will continue to be that of south-south. But let us graduate from that to being mega project financiers, because that is in the interest of both India and Africa. We ought to be looking at projects that are going to last a lifetime and longer. However, there are issues that are coming up. My friend David is there, which Exim Bank has come up with an excellent scheme of buyer's credit, under which my own company has taken up projects. But more than 5-6 years ago, there was a promise that was made from the government side that there will be a subvention on interest. In the absence of that, interest adds up, sometimes making it for Indian companies to be non-competitive. So where we are competitive cost-wise, why should we be non-competitive on cost of funding? By merely putting in 200 crores to 250 crores per year, the Indian Finance Ministry will be facilitating project exports of $5 billion per year, something like that. I think time has come to take stock of this, and this is an area where employment, not just Indian employment, but also employment of the African countries will be built, so that this is something worth considering. Plus, again, headroom under the National Export Insurance Account for the buyer's credit, and building Exim Bank's own capability for funding projects by enhancing Exim Bank's capital. I only wish these points would be suitably communicated to the Ministry of Finance so that when decision making is to be made by the persons who are relevant, they are told this in emphatic manner that this is what is going to build employment. This is what is going to help India earn a good name in Africa. Not just that, also get business for India on a sustained basis. Normal exports might add to your exchequer, but it is project exports that will continually, sustainably keep up your foreign exchange building. And this is where, unfortunately, the incentives are minimum. I would strongly recommend that Vivekananda Foundation should take this up at the policy making level to ensure that ECGC, Exim Bank, they are all well equipped for this. The funding is done properly to them. The budgetary support required for subvention of interest and all is given. This is what will ensure that Indo-African collaboration is taken up on a larger scale, bigger projects, mega projects that are there for people to see. Hospitals is an area where China cannot compete with us. It's something where Indian medical know-how is second to none today. Supposing if we have a line of credit where 5 to 10 years working capital also is added to that, and African countries have been demanding that Indian companies should go and run the hospitals, why don't we equip that? It's built, equipped, and run by Indian companies for, let's say, the suitable operators for 5 years or 10 years or something like that. Let us think out of the box. Come with such solutions. MBA is quite willing to hear it. I think we'll have to put it up on a suitable way. And at this point, I'll stop it because I thought I'll stop it. Thank you. I got the hint. Thank you very much.
All of us want to hear you for a much longer period, but you made some very strong points, Mr. Kubuswamy, and we greatly appreciate your understanding. Thank you very much. May I now invite Dr. Nalin Shingle to address you, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would first like to thank the Vivekananda International Foundation and CII for having given this opportunity to be before this august audience. I will be primarily focusing on cooperation in the energy sector. And as we all know, energy is critical for development, whether it is agriculture, where we need for irrigation, water pumping, for education, for lighting, for children to study in the night, for the health sector, for maintaining the vaccine chains, for the primary health centers, for industries, or even at home for the quality of life. Today, we know that Africa has almost 600 million people without energy access. And there is a huge solar potential. Africa has one of the highest solar potentials today. In this context, what I will be doing is I'll be briefly going through some of the things that my company has done in the past and what we are looking at, and then make 3 brief points which I think are important here. So, Central Electronics Limited is a PSU under the Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India, which has been a manufacturer with more than 40 years of experience in manufacturing of cells, modules, and systems, doing EPC as technology provider, R&D, capacity building, and project management consultancy. 1977 was when CEL entered into the area of solar photovoltaics, and internationally, I think that is very few companies at that stage who are into this area. We made India's first solar cell in 1977, first solar module in 1978, and thereafter the first solar power plant and various other improvements over time. We have a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility very near Delhi, and our modules are recognized for their quality. In fact, there was a recent study sponsored by the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy to see, because the modules are supposed, these systems have a life of 25 years, but how many of them are existing after, is a question that arose. And IIT Bombay was commissioned to carry out a study of power plants in existence more than 15 years. And that is where some of our modules were seen to be, they're singled out as champion modules. Internationally, we have worked in more than 30 countries across the globe, with 15 countries in Africa. Mali is where we have a lot of work which is going on in Mali, with almost 5,000 home lighting systems, 600 street lighting systems, water pumping systems. This is a huge project we are ongoing project in Mali. Sudan is another place we did. This was in terms of capacity building. So wherever, this is the practice we follow. Wherever we go, our people go and train the locals for doing the installation, commissioning, and maintenance. So what you can see here is in Sudan, this was a project covering 10 villages. For the first village, which was Khadar, our teams did the installation commissioning. Thereafter, the balance of the 9 villages were done by the people who had been trained, local people who had been trained in the first project. In Congo, again, capacity building, training for installation commissioning. Guinea-Bissau, 20 villages electrification project under UNDP project. Namibia, village electrification through solar energy. In fact, on the top right, you see Dr. Sam Nujoma, who visited our company, and just to test the strength of the module, he was, he had some doubts of how strong the module is, and he was invited to walk on them, so he was just standing on the module. Mozambique, where we have in the schools and the villages. Senegal, solar home lighting systems. Zambia, hospitals as well as schools for the facilities, as well as the staff quarters. And then, of course, across the globe, various other places we have worked, including Afghanistan, Mongolia, Nepal. And we have also provided technology, transfer technology for manufacturing to Syria, Sudan, Mozambique, for manufacturing of solar panels. We have a range of projects nationally also we have worked on. Home lighting systems, street lighting, lanterns, mini grids, and railway stations. Some BIPV is another interesting area we've been working on, where you see the panel itself forms a roof, whether it is a parking or it is a platform. The panel itself can form a roof. A warehouse, which is with a complete solar roof. So you don't need to have one roof and then on top of that the panels for rooftop systems. Water pumping. Solar rickshaws. Solar e-rickshaws, golf carts, trains. There's some solar bus shelters also. So now I would like to briefly come to the 3 points that I wanted to make in the context of use of solar energy, especially for Africa. The first was on, again, in the context of something which was said in the morning session by His Excellency, the Rwandan ambassador, about appropriate technologies, where he mentioned that we are today getting expensive technologies which may or may not be appropriate to the requirements. And here I talk of grid and off-grid. We are today largely facing, we find a great interest in grid-tied, large-sized grid-tied power plants, whether it is India, whether it's Africa. But we do need to remember here that solar is essentially a distributed source of energy. When we put in a 10 megawatt or a 50 megawatt or a 100 megawatt power plant, we have concentrated that into one place, and then we talk of evacuation with the grid, and the grid may or may not exist, or maybe the quality of the grid may be questionable. So we face a huge investment, huge issues in utilizing that infrastructure. And in a situation where the demand is distributed, we talk of 600 million people distributed across the continent without access to energy, then the use of standalone systems, or street lighting systems, home lighting systems, or mini grids and microgrids, that is what becomes quite important. That becomes there. That offers low-cost solutions to the problems that are being faced. So when we are looking at what sort of systems we are installing, this is a question: what is appropriate for the requirement? That's a question that we need to be very clear about. The second point that I would like to make is in context of what the chairman said in the way starting about the political pillar having created visibility. There's a lot of expectations. People are talking about what is happening, but delivery on the ground is not matching with what expectations are being created. On the one hand, it is important for transparency guidelines, for the processes to be followed, and on the other hand, I think we must meet the expectations of visibility, because if we just get into the planning stage without the execution coming in, there are issues. On that, there is the approach that I would like to suggest is that we go in for, let us say, 5% or 10% of the amount being put into pilots. When we're talking of a $2 billion funding for solar projects, even if 100 million could go into pilots, which could be taken off immediately, and the rest of the 95% could go through the complete process. It would take whatever time it takes. By that time, the pilots could be in place. There would be, within 6 months, 4 months, 6 months, the pilots could be on the ground in various countries, in various, and that would actually help the main fund projects, because what is working on the field, what are the issues being faced in the field, all that would come out, and that would actually go as an input to the final project which would be created. Second part of this could be, integrated projects for developing a comprehensive strategy in terms of first looking at pilots in various areas, then putting in place the ecosystem for servicing, for supply of parts, materials, etc., and then getting into the manufacturing stage, transfer technology, manufacturing. The complete setup could be done, and we could identify maybe a few countries where this sort of a project could be initiated. And PSUs, there are PSUs working in the area. They could actually play an important role in this whole in this first part. And the second part, when proper, the complete process is gone through, that could be taken up by the private sector. And the third point, final point, a very brief point I would like to make is that the government's role, you see, because we get a lot of groups coming to us from various countries, and when they come for training in various institutions here. And one of the refrains one does get to hear is that the entrepreneurs from our northern neighbor, they are much more, they are less risk averse, they are much faster, able to do a lot of things, whereas the Indian, entrepreneurs or industries are risk averse. They take slower, they take much more time to decide. And in that context, it is important that the government's efforts and funding could be focused on de-risking, which is something which already is being done in various insurance schemes. To improve the investments, de-risking, making it so in allowing the private sector to actually move in and deliver quickly and expand quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, and especially the suggestions you made at the end. Mr. Das, you have the floor now.
Excellency, our Ambassador Bhatia, Joint Secretary Mr. Dinkar Asthana, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I come from the power sector, so I would be rather discussing on again the same subject of energy and electricity. Now we know how important energy and electricity as an infrastructure is important for a country's economic advancement. So as a thumb rule, when we say for a developing country, when we were also struggling in the last 2 decades, we used to say as a thumb rule, the energy sector needs to go up by at least 300 basis points more than what GDP increase we aspire. In that context, I am happy to tell you that we have by and large reached that stage today. And I come from a company which is BHEL, which is one of the largest public sector undertaking. It was created with a mandate to build up this infrastructure way back in 70s. And we've been fairly able to achieve that. By and large, today, India is, I'll say, has enough power. We have sustained the industry loads. And BHEL, in that manner, has kind of contributed by close to 170 gigabytes and above that we have supplied to the total installed capacity of 300 gigabytes in the country. Apart from this, we have also contributed outside India and in Africa, especially the 2000 megawatt projects that we have already delivered. We started with Libya in 70s, and based on our performance in Libya, we were given repeat jobs. And there was a joint venture also formed by the Libyan authorities with Indian government. And subsequent to that, we got series of orders in Sudan. We gave a 500 megawatt power plant. So in Ethiopia, Excellency, we have given to your Fincha Sugar and Tendaho sugar mills power plants. So in our strength, this is a strength that we carry. And now that we have been able to reach that mandate, we are also diversifying into various other areas. Now, if I do not again dwell into the issues which has already been brought out by my panelists, I would just briefly touch upon some of the experience that we had as a power plant equipment supplier or a project executioner, and some of the learnings. I will put it as a learning and opportunity, and not and also the challenges are within it. One is the cost of power in Africa is very high. It's 13 cents to an unit, which otherwise should be close to 4 to 5 cents worldwide. So this high cost of power is a deterrent for any discoms to buy power from the grid. So on one hand, when we have a country like India, say for example, if we compare Africa to India, Africa is a continent, India is again a country. We can say it is a kind of a continent of 29 states and 7 union territories. But okay, Africa is also having the same kind of population that we have. Africa, for example, has the same GDP that we have. But when you see the per capita power consumption, Africa is half of what we are. And then Africa, when we say Africa is not inclusive, the Northern Africa, the Maghreb region is way above the other regions. The southern region is again very fast developed, very well developed. It's the central region in Africa which has got a very little power, per capita power consumption in 2 digits. So this is an area where we have Africa is 10 times bigger than India in size. So what we see here is the power generation and the power reach to ultimate end user is not happening because the villages, the people in rural areas are living much far off from the transmission lines or the substations. So what Mr. Nalin was saying is very correct, that we have a model of distributed or a mini or a macro grid which can sustain the electricity reach to the end users. But then this is, in my view, not a sustainable model. A sustainable model is one where a country grows as an agrarian country to an industry to then the services. So Africa, if it can emulate what India did, we can kind of set up industries and make up infrastructure catering to those industries. So what we talk in Africa is only a reach to a common man. A light, a bulb or a light or an electric, a small load is not enough to sustain an economy. If Africa wants to reach anywhere close to a developing country, or as we said, Africa also is a continent to look upon in this particular century, then Africa has to go by leaps and bounds. Then we come to funding and financing, which already has been discussed a lot. 60, 70 billions of funding is required to, kind of grow every year for the next 10 years to reach anywhere close to a per capita consumption of even half the world average. But so all these are issues, and we'll be able to take up questions if at all you have any. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Das. Appreciate your being very concise and direct. And now, Mr. Makhija, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bhatia, the Chair, His Excellency Ambassador Kami of Ethiopia, Excellencies and my friends. Water and agriculture happen to be the basic need of all human beings. And I'll be confining my narrative to water and agriculture. As the name suggests, I represent a company called Jain Irrigation System. And we have been very active in the field of water and management and creating agriculture value chains, sustainable agriculture value chains for production of food. But first of all, coming to Africa, we can divide the African agriculture in 4 different segments. I have lived in Africa, I have traveled widely in Africa, and I can say that the first major segment is the farmland owned by expats, companies overseas, which are basically commodity based like sugar farms, rice farms. The other type of agriculture is the land owned by the churches. And both these categories of farms are highly mechanized. But these are gated properties, isolated, having no ripple effect on the communities outside the gates of these farms. The third category is the land owned by the governments. In many of the countries, it is owned by the Home Ministry under jails. And the last category is a family-owned farms, where the small agriculture farmers in Africa are no different from the small farmers in India. It is this particular category of farmers that we need to address in case we want to see a sustainable agriculture growth in Africa. My company, Percy, has been undertaking large number of projects of all types in Africa. We have undertaken projects in practically 30 countries in Africa for right from survey, design, execution of irrigation projects and sustainable agriculture value chains. What we are primarily doing is that we assist the farmers, we assist the governments, right from testing of the soil, water, survey of the area, execution of the projects, small or big, on turnkey basis, providing sprinkler or drip irrigation system, and then thereafter hand-holding those local governments, local communities to ensure that these projects deliver the value for which these are designed and created. Similarly, in India, we have impacted nearly 7 million Indian farmers, small and big million farms, small farmers having land of less than 2 hectares. And we have come to a stage that today the Prime Minister of the country, Mr. Narendra Modi, he says per drop more crop. That means we have to save on water to ensure that we are able to deliver more crop with small quantity of water. But let us look back how India actually arrived at this situation where from PL 480, what was called ship to mouth situation in 1960s, to a problem of plenty today in this country. We have surplus food, we have surplus sugar, we have a large number of items which we are not able to consume and looking for the exports. And this was made possible on account of a couple of steps that were taken in 1970s and 80s. First and foremost was Green Revolution. But I think after Green Revolution, what in my opinion is the development of private enterprise like private water sources, bore wells, irrigation systems. And this was facilitated by the Indian banking system. During 1970s and 80s, the Indian banking system expanded very rapidly. And inasmuch as I recall that at one stage, the State Bank of India announced that we are opening our 6,000 branch in Jabalpur, and after 3 years, they say we're opening a 10,000 branch in Delhi. And the development process was accelerated by creation of agriculture development banks or ADBs, agriculture development branches, rural regional banks. And this actually helped in making the farmer access to the capital required, short or long term money required, so that he or she was able to invest in agriculture and produce more from the limited land. Mind you, the land holding in India is 2 hectares or less, and similarly in Africa also we have a similar situation. And unless I find that in Africa we replicate this model of Indian agriculture, we have institutions like NABARD. I always say in every meeting relating to Africa, we have very fine institution like NABARD, which has been instrumental in expanding the reach of the credit to the rural India in a very efficient way. And when I go to Africa, I talk to the bankers over there. I recall I have met bankers in Kampala, I have met bankers in Lusaka. And I have been stressing that in case you want to have a sustainable development in Africa, you want to ensure that your farmers can stand on their own 2 feet, because agriculture in Africa is very primitive, very backward. It's devoid of any capital, it's devoid of financial, it's devoid of credit. So it's necessary that you create a very strong banking system there. We in India have also the advantage that we have finance institutions like ICR, we have PFDCs, we have research farms, we have seed farms, which cater to the local needs. And this because of this R&D activity of ICR, IARI, research farms, the PFDCs at regional level, at the block level, or even the extension agencies that we have created, like agricultural extension officers, that Indian agriculture has reached from ship to mouth to a situation of plenty as such. So unless, and I don't believe that when we're talking about India-Africa cooperation, it is a one-way traffic. Unless we make Africa a partner in development, we actually make them develop, we enable them to be self-sufficient, we enable them to have a sustainable agricultural growth, or what I mean, I take cue from what Mr. David has said in the morning, that when we can have a enterprise like Maruti in India, and that becomes a kind of a nucleus for the future growth of industrial development, that becomes the nucleus of the automobile growth in this country as such. So it is necessary that if we want to talk about Africa growth, then we have to think out of box. We have to think of developing Africa in a manner that it is self-sustainable in every respect. And skill development is one area which has been discussed over here. I recall we have in this country IITs, we have ITIs. Believe me, the IIT guys like me, we go to USA, but it's only the ITIs who have built this country. The ITI guys have helped us to create the factories, helped us to create SMEs. And SME happens to be the backbone of this country. Today, if I want to execute a project in Africa, I do not have that facility. If I want to buy a small little item, I have to think about getting it back from either South Africa or getting it from India. So the SME sector is missing in Africa. This is one area where African governments have to focus on. We have to develop your own small scale industry. I also recall that at one time, some 40 years back, we used to have Indo-German tool rooms. The German government helped us to establish tool rooms or ITIs. And these ITIs helped us to create and assist us in creating large SME or also heavy electrical or heavy machine factories. We have been talking about South-South cooperation all along. The major issue in Africa, in my opinion, is a lack of capital. We all have discussed that. I have had a large number of, I know a large number of people who have invested in Africa, started projects over there. But those projects did not succeed because after making investment of a couple of $1 million or so, they expected the local financial institutions to come forward and assist them, and that financial capability was not available. Just 2 minutes. Sir. So that is where I feel that Africa needs an infusion of capital, whether it's a banking system, whether it's the African Development Bank, whether it's the World Bank. Whichever way, I'm not a banker, but then I think this is one area which is necessary that the Africa has the access to capital in every possible way, including agriculture. This morning, Mr. Trimurti had mentioned that Indian assistance, Indian cooperation to Africa is a respect for its sovereign, respect for its culture, and we really work in a manner that we do not. Well, I just want to say that the Africa has to choose its partners very, very carefully. It's very important, and Africa should not fall from one situation of colonialism to another situation of colonialism because of the debt trap. I'm sure my friends understand what I'm trying to say. So it is necessary that we explore the possibilities of doing business in Africa in a manner that we respect their sovereignty and we are able to execute the projects in a very dispassionate and critical way, as Ambassador Bhatia has mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Makhija. Dear friends, that completes our panel. I'll resist the temptation to present to you a summary because frankly, there's no time. I think I would request organizers to give me 5 minutes so that we could have just a couple of questions, and I'll take the chair's initiative to ask one question to the ambassador because he has to leave. He has another appointment in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Excellency, you talked about challenges and opportunities, and in the morning we heard a lot about the approaching continental free trade area that is to be set up in Africa. The spokesmen for Africa are giving the impression as if it's just about to happen if it has not already happened. But critics and realists point out that the free trade area is still in distant future. What is the reality? I think if you could kindly brief this very interested audience as to what are the timelines and what are the prospects of free trade area to be set up in Africa. I think that would clarify a lot of matters.
First of all, I would like to thank you for hearing what we are saying attentively, and this is a good opportunity also for all of us to share our views and ideas. I think Africa is a continent in move, I may say. It has been for many years sleeping, and I think this time Africa is growing, both economically, and population-wise. And I think it has almost close to the same amount of population as India is having. So this is a very huge market. Now there are different economic integrations which are already taking place in Africa. In the West, ECOWAS is one of the area where many West African countries come together. We have Maghreb in the north, and we have also COMESA, which has almost close to 400 to 500 million population, and many, especially from north, some countries from the north to the south of Africa. And COMESA is a huge market. I think it was in 2017, no, 2018, already the countries have signed a common trade treaty, and it is a huge opportunity for the African countries, and also those who are investing in Africa, especially in COMESA countries. It is a huge market also for most of Indian companies have been set in these areas, and it is a huge market. Of course, there are regional, economic integration approaches like IGAD in Africa and the SADC in the south, and as I have said, ECOWAS in the west. Maybe Excellency the High Commissioner from Nigeria would, I hope, he can talk much about that. Apart that, most of these African countries have many opportunities also, not among them, but some of developed world is offering to those developing countries from Africa some market accesses, like AGOA in America, North America, Canada, as well as the EU, and some of Asian countries like China and Japan have offered, quota-free trade agreements with those countries, and companies who have invested in those member countries to those markets have free access to sell those their products, and I hope opportunities are very big, and still more to come. The East African communities are also a big market share also, especially those 5 countries who have tried to integrate their economies in East African community. And these regional integrations are offering huge opportunities.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dear friends, if you have 1 or 2 maximum questions. Yes, High Commissioner.
For the implementation of the African Free Trade Area. If the ambassador from Rwanda had been around, I am sure that he might have addressed that. But if you go back to the history of the European Union, with this coal and steel community of the 1956 and all that, it took a very, very, very long time for them to come to the integrated system that the EU represents today. If you sign an agreement, an overreaching agreement for free trade, you have to build institutions for free trade. Now, the institutions means you have to have databases, for instance. You have to have a functioning customs bodies. Nigeria, for when the African Free Trade Area was being signed in Kigali, President Buhari was already, his advanced party had already gone. Then the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria came and the Nigeria Labour Congress, they came and they said he shouldn't go. The reason is that there is a big fear. There is a big fear in Nigeria that what the African African Free Trade Area was going to do was to find maybe one country that was relatively weak in manufacturing ability, and then you come and dump all manner of finished products from outside the world, and then it gets a branded name that it is originating from country X, and then you swamp all the other places. But I know that the whole idea of free trade is to have a big market, so that if you have a big market and Shaponji and Kanunji wants to come and do something there, then they can have a market. Now, but if you open up Africa and then all that you get is for finished products from Bangalore or from Shanghai to come and kill off the infant industries, then that's the problem. So the answer that I will give is that you can Google it to see the timeline. But even if you have a timeline, it will be a statement of vision. It is not going to be something that will follow immediately, because the capacity building is yet to come and is being done now, but it has to be gradual. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for your candor. And the applause that you have received shows that some of the ideas about FTA, even in this country, have a resonance to what you have said. But thank you for being candid and putting a realistic picture on something that often gets projected. It has to be projected, but I think we, those who follow Africa, should know very clearly. We have a representative of the Indian government here, and I think Chair cannot allow him to go without answering one question. And the question, Dinkar, is about the present state with regard to a large number of institutions the government of India had promised as a result of 2008 and 2011 summits. By the time we reached 2015 summits, I think we decided to revise and prune a number of those institutions. And I think then the idea was that while we'll do the capacity development through ITEC, we will continue to establish some of the regional institutions, but the number would be much more focused and selective. Could you just tell us a little bit about the present position on this issue?
They are not being handled through the ITEC, so I do not have information. They are being handled by a different division. They are being handled through the Africa division directly. So the division that does the ITEC, I do not have the entire picture.
I appreciate that. I think, thank you very much for that answer. Is there any other question? Great. I think we have already taken a lot of time from my dear friend Anil, who would now handle the next session. Vivekanand International Foundation, Dr. Arvind Gupta, Dinkar, thank you very much, and please applaud our panel.
Thank you.